So if your question doesn't get answered, don't worry, I will keep them. And Jack and I have talked about this, and we really want to honor that our guests are not going to be able to be here very often, and so give priority to the questions that involve them rather than the two of us. So I'm going to start with this one, just to throw at you. There are many cultural similarities between Jewish faith and Muslim faith, and yet there are such deep divides between the two. What has caused this? Go for it.
And I have 30 seconds to respond to this.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. So it's a matter of how we look at things in general. If you look at what actually brings us together, you will find a lot of things. In fact, in my book that's here, it draws similarities between the Quran, the teachings of the Quran, the Old Testament, and the New Testaments, even though the differences are also enumerated there. But just like any other relationship, I remember with my wife when we first met, we were just talking about what's common, what we like together. We were not talking about our differences really earlier on. And as we started to get to know each other a little bit better, that's when we were a little bit more open talking about our differences. But that's when we knew that we are going to be together, we love each other, and so on and so forth. And so, like anything, it's in a family of, say, brothers and sisters, there are going to be some commonalities and some differences. In the three monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, we have the same father, Abraham. And so it depends on how we want to be, how we want to, behave, if you will. So if you want to misbehave, then we'll fight. But if you want to, cherish our forefathers, we have a lot of commonalities. So I think it depends on how we look at ourselves.
David, you want to add anything? You have to hold it in until it turns green. Is it green? Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you'll permit me an introductory comment. I want to thank you all for inviting all of us. I'm David Levine. I am a rabbi. You can tell from my bio, I live in San Francisco. I'm fairly new to the pulpit, but have been entrenched in the faith for as long as I can remember. I want to start off by saying that just sitting here this morning, I see that there's a lot more that brings our faiths together than divides us. When you come to our synagogue, and by the way, you're all welcome to come and be a guest, much as I'm a guest with you today, you'll find the services run pretty similar. The prayer that Peter introduced you to from the Old Testament, the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, those are seminal prayers in our belief, and they carry over to the New Testament as best I can tell. There is so much more that brings us together than divides us. Our primary mission, which I think we all share up here, and everyone in this room shares, is what we call tikkun olam, which in Hebrew means repair of the world. We acknowledge that there's problems. We acknowledge there's pretty strong divisions among the faiths sometimes, but we also acknowledge a commonality of faith, of spirit, of the need to correct the problems. And I think we can all take some comfort in knowing that we're all in that project together. And I'm not here to deny the divisions. They run deep. They run over land. They run over differences in beliefs. But at the end of the day, as my colleague mentioned, we stem from the same ancestry. And we are, I think, destined to come together again. But for the moment, we all have to learn to see the good in all of us and to work together, and that's what we strive for. But thank you again for having me.
Okay, this is more specifically for Ejaz. What is the difference between Shia and Sunni, and does the Quran state or imply anything jihad?
Okay. So that's the two separate
they
questions.
They are two separate questions, but they're both good.
Yeah. And also kind of actually let me back off a little bit. So I would also like to thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure being here. And so thanks, Barbara, for inviting us. So let's talk about the Shias and Sunnis first. I'm a Shia Muslim, just so that you know where I'm coming from. But I look at myself in a more global way. So I'm a Muslim first and foremost. I'm actually a human first and foremost. And then a Muslim, and then a Shia, and so on and so forth. I do think, I take and view religion much more globally. I do see that there are different paths to the same goal. And our goal is God. I'm specifically talking about monotheistic religions. It's just different roads that we take. So when we talk about Shias and Sunnis, it's also, there are a lot of commonalities. Same thing, I would like to highlight what's common between Shias and Sunnis rather than what's actually different between Shias and Sunnis. But if you just want to, just in 5 seconds, know what's the difference between Shias and Sunnis, remember this. Shias are good, Sunnis are bad. But you know, this is totally unbiased opinion for me. Yeah, but both Shias and Sunnis believe in one God. And we talked about Shema in Deuteronomy 6 and Mark 12. It's also the basis of the Islamic faith. And it starts with La ilaha illallah. There is no God but one God. Okay. And so that's the very essence of the religion. Then we believe in the prophets. By the way, all the Hebrew prophets are also Islamic prophets. And then it ends with Muhammad. We consider him the last prophet. So the Shias and Sunnis believe in one God. They believe in the Quran as the holy book, and then they believe in Muhammad as the prophet. And then there are some differences in the rituals. And in many ways, that the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are kind of different. In some of the similar ways, Shiaism and Sunnism are different. I think a lot of the rituals are different. But we all pray 5 times. We do Hajj in Mecca. We do the fasting during the month of Ramadan. So all of those are very similar. The division, though, started way back in the 6th or the 7th century CE, and that's when the Prophet Muhammad died, and there was a question about who is going to be his hire. The Shias believe that he had already declared that Ali, his cousin and son-in-law, will be the next religious leader. The Sunnis' thought was that he didn't clarify it, so they had a council of a small select group of people who elected Abu Bakr as the first caliph. And so that's when the division really started. And now we see a lot of differences, but back in the day, there were no different Shia mosque and Sunni mosque. By the way, so Ali then eventually became the 4th caliph, so there was the first 3 caliph and then the 4th caliph. The Shias believe that he was still the religious leader, so they consider him as the first religious leader. Shias did not consider running of the state and the religious affair, so they did not have a division of church and state. They believed Ali was their spiritual leader as well as the state leader. So even in the days of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, they still believe Ali was their spiritual leader. And then, there's a whole history of how, over the period of centuries, actually, this gulf got bigger and bigger. But like I said, the gulf may be bigger in terms of the rituals, but in their core beliefs and practices, they're very, very similar. I would say actually they're 90% same and 10% different. So it's not even looking at it as glass half empty or glass half full. It's like, glass 90% here or 10% there.
Maybe the difference between Catholic and Protestant might be a similar, would you say? Okay.
Right.
And what about the Quran and jihad?
So jihad is probably the most misunderstood concept or belief, not only by mainstream, but also even actually among some Muslims as well. Jihad simply means to strive. It literally means to strive. And there are greater form of jihad, and there is lesser form of jihad. So actually the greater form of jihad is the inner jihad, meaning the inner struggle. So I'm striving against poverty, social justice, or temptations, the inner temptations, lust and power and so on and so forth. That's the inner jihad. And the Quran considers that as the bigger or the greater form of jihad, or jihad-e-akbar, as it's called. The jihad that we commonly refer to as, is not even actually called jihad necessarily in the Quran. All the words that are derivatives of jihad in the Quran refers to that internal struggle to strive. That the military form of jihad that we all commonly refer to as jihad is actually, the word used in the Quran is called qital. That's very specific. to specific situations, and it's a lesser jihad. It's always not, so there are many, many guidelines and rules. The first of all, it has to be defensive. It has to be in the way of God, but it has to be defensive. You cannot start aggression. There's a verse in the Quran, chapter 2, 190, that's very, very specific, and it actually has like, within one verse, it says 3 times practically, do not commit aggression because God does not love aggressors. So I can go on and on, but that in a nutshell what the Quran's perspective on jihad is.
Thank you. Okay, there's so many. And this is more actually, I would say, the question is, if radical Islam leads to death and terror, is there such a thing as radical Christianity, and where does it lead? But I'm going to expand it to, is there such a thing as radical Judaism also? And Jack, do you want to throw an answer at that and take one of the mics?
Well, I think radical Christianity could certainly be described as the Ku Klux Klan, for instance.
Absolutely.
I mean, that would certainly be radical Christianity, and that would lead to violence and hatred. So yeah, I think that would probably be where I would define radical Christianity.
Yeah. And you can, the Inquisition, Crusades, you can go back through time. We've had examples of very violent, very radical Christianity.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
But yeah, Ku Klux Klan, some of our cults.
Yeah.
So, how about Judaism? And there's such a thing as, go ahead with that.
Absolutely there is. I don't know any faith that doesn't have its extremist elements.
Yeah.
It's part of the belief system. It's part of learning to work through differences and living together. But with respect to Judaism, we have many extremists in Israel and other places who believe dogmatically that, for example, the lands of the West Bank and Gaza Strip belong to Judaism through biblical command, and that there's no compromising that. In the world we live in, that's not going to hold sway with a lot of people, but it does with some. And the question then becomes what to do about it, and we all have to work toward compromise. There's many other examples. If my wife were here, she would talk about an anti-feminist bent among the extremists. There's a neighborhood in Jerusalem that if you walk without being properly, modestly dressed, you're going to get harassed, and that's considered a problem amongst most other Jews. Nevertheless, we learn to heal those divisions and once again work together toward solutions.
Okay, this is for Ejaz again. Talk about Sharia law. Can you talk about Sharia law?
I'm glad that we only have half an hour to talk about these important topics. Sharia simply means Islamic jurisprudence. It's no different than, the Torah means law, right? So Torah is also Sharia. It's the Jewish Sharia, if you will. And so there are similar sets of laws for Islam. But just like the Jewish laws are applicable to Jews, they are not meant to be imposed on others. The Islamic Sharia laws are very, very same. And so there are a set of laws, but they're meant to be followed by Muslims and not to be imposed on others. And I know there's a lot of, I can't remember the number of states. I think there are at least 13 states that have passed an anti-Sharia law. And it's, quite honestly, it's more political than it's theological or religiously based, because all these states, there's never been a Sharia law movement. In other words, nobody actually has tried to pass a Sharia law. So if there's not a movement to pass a Sharia law, I'm not sure why we need to actually pass all these anti-Sharia laws. Nobody's actually bringing Sharia to the United States. So I'm free to practice the Islamic Sharia law in my individual life, and they don't necessarily contradict. For example, I'm not, so according to the Sharia law, I'm not supposed to drink alcohol, but I don't impose it to others. So it's a lot of it is actually, number one, the Islamic Sharia laws are meant for quote-unquote Islamic countries or Muslim majority countries. And more importantly, I think it is meant for individuals to follow. In fact, the golden rule that we've, there's the golden rule according to Mark in the Christian version. That is, I know there's a Jewish version, there's a Muslim version, but even just quoting the Christian version from the book of the Gospel of Matthew, it says, so do unto others what you would like to do unto others what you like to do unto you.
Before they do unto you.
Unto you, right.
Yeah, no, that's not it.
But this was not the end of it, though. Actually, the verse goes on to say, and that's the law, right? And that law, if you translate, actually, if you look at the Arabic translation of the Gospels, actually that word used is Sharia. That's the Sharia, but that's the Sharia of Jesus, and that's also the Sharia of the Jews. If I may, let me just go back to when we're talking about Sharia. The thing is, the concept of Islam, people think Islam is a totally alien or different religion. The fact of the matter is, it is the continuation or the culmination of the Abrahamic family, if you will. So Islam teaches that all the Hebrew prophets, so in fact, Adam was the first prophet of Islam. Then Moses and obviously Abraham and his sons, Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob and Joseph, who's Yusuf in Islam, and so on and so forth, all the way to Aaron and then and Jesus. They're all considered prophets of Islam because they brought the same religion. And in Islam, in its very essence and simplicity, it says there is one God, who is the creator, and we praise him. And all these prophets were his messengers. They brought the same religion, which is, there is one God, there is a God, and there is one God, and also be good. Good to yourself, good to others. That's the essence of Islam, that's the essence of Judaism, that's the essence of Christianity. So in its very principle, a lot of the laws are really the same. So be honest, be good to your neighbors. And the definition of neighbors is the same as the definition of neighbors in Christianity and Judaism. And I can go on and on. There is nothing that says it's okay to steal if your neighbor is a non-Muslim. So just like Jesus never said, love your Muslim, except if they're Muslims, right? So, or love your neighbors unless they're Muslims, right? So Jesus just stopped at love your Muslims, love your neighbors. Actually, I'm part of a panel that's called Love Your Muslim Neighbors. I'm just mixing up in my mind. But loving your neighbors, being kind to everyone else around you. In Islam, actually extends that further. There's a hadith or the saying of Prophet Muhammad that says, if you want God to be kind to you, you have to be kind to his creations. Not just Muslims, not just humans, all his creatures. And his creations or creatures include everything, and the animals as well as the plants and the planet Earth. So Muslims have a religious duty to protect the planet and everything in it, on it. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on and on.
No, that's good. Again, you guys are guests. This is a more general question for everybody. Does God have the ability to defy the laws of physics? David, we'll start with you. Just push it again. It means it's okay. It's dead? Okay, we'll give it to Lyle. He'll fix it. But go ahead, David. You can answer while he's changing them.
In our view, what a question, huh? In our view, God created everything. I think we share that view, and included among that is the laws of physics. So if God were to decide that physics wouldn't apply anymore, then that would be the world we would live in. But for the moment, those are the rules of the road. So we apply them because they are God-given, as just like everything else is in our world.
I'm a physician, by the way, practicing physician, and so I also look at the religion and also medicine very differently. And I don't necessarily, so totally what you said, David. To me, the laws of physics and God's laws are no different. God, for some reason, people think if you were created by God, then it was just totally random. We don't have to follow any laws. So the Quran is very clear that God created this earth and the heavens and everything else in between in His perfect wisdom. And His wisdom was these laws, what we know as laws of physics or laws of medicine. Nothing happens by accident. So if I start to actually sweat a lot, and I'm getting dehydrated, and my blood pressure is lowering, and a lot of my hormones are kicking in to retain sodium and potassium, and my sweat glands are shrinking so I don't sweat anymore, and so on and so forth. That's not a random thing. So we may think, well, so just because I can find that receptor, and then the sodium channels, and so on and so forth, that hormone that actually regulates all this, that doesn't mean that it just happened randomly. So I totally believe in, by the way, the theory of intelligent design. So for some reason we think once we find that now that we know the basis of this phenomenon, now that we find a physical basis for it. So for example, I'll give you an example. 5,000 years ago, we didn't know that the kidneys basically regulate your sodium and potassium and all these other hormones that are so critical. And as we found them, did that necessarily mean that now that we know how the kidneys work and regulate our sodium, potassium, and our water balance in the body, that then those are the laws that were randomly established? So I don't separate between the God of law and God of physics or God of medicine. And God created us not only with a purpose, but in His wisdom, everything actually happened in a perfect balance. And so the laws of physics and laws of medicine are the laws of God to me.
Okay. Jack, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I think I would agree with about 99% of what's been said, but I also think that God is capable of anything. And God can defy the laws of physics if God so chooses. Otherwise, we wouldn't have miracles. And I believe in miracles. I believe that God is the God of miracles. So God can do anything. And I think oftentimes we get so caught up, and I'm not, this is not a criticism by any means, but we get so caught up in what we know or what we think we know that we're not able to open our hands and hearts to new understanding and new knowledge. And I think there is that out there. And we're not to worship our own minds. We worship the God of creation. And God is capable of anything. So.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I have a mic, but thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, totally agree.
Go
So
ahead.
that's, and we reading the book of Exodus, when the Red Sea parted, that was not according to the laws of physics. So I totally agree with you too. So.
Yeah. Agree. I don't think I have anything to add. Okay, this question was phrased in terms of Revelation 16, but the question is really, how can the God of law also be described as the God of love, also be described as the God of wrath? Revelation 16. And it doesn't have an S for the lovely person who wrote that. It's Revelation. It's one revelation. The book is one. But how can the God of love also be described as a God of wrath? Go ahead.
This is one of the age-old questions in Judaism, probably in all the faiths you have represented up here, is how do you reconcile a God who, especially in the earlier part of the Old Testament, can be quick to anger, quick to punish in big ways. Noah and the flood, that wasn't an ordinary day. That was about as bad as it gets. There are other examples. How do you reconcile that with the God of love and mercy and the God of forgiveness, which we see more examples of as the Old Testament proceeds? It's not an easy question. The way I've tried to reconcile it is there are equal parts justice and mercy, and there needs to be some message sent when things go wrong so that the people know what's expected of them. By the same token, there has to be some accommodation for the fact that people are fallible and are going to err and make mistakes and need to be brought back into the fold. And we don't always get that in kind of a convenient, comfortable order in the Old Testament, but we do see both sides. And that's why, as a lawyer and a prosecutor in an earlier existence, I'm reminded constantly of the need for both justice and mercy, even if they're not always blended perfectly together in our sacred text. We need to make that formula a little bit better.
Yeah, I totally agree. So Islam also is, so we do believe in God's kindness. In fact, the most commonly repeated attribute of God in the Quran is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, which means the most kind, the most merciful. It doesn't talk about the most just or the Almighty. So any of these attributes that relate to His power or being wrathful and so on and so forth. So He constantly wants to remind us that God is the most kind and the most merciful. But I agree with what David said. There has to be a balance. But if you look at even our more secular way of looking at things, if let me give an example. Like, let's say you get hold of these butchers from ISIS, right? Would you then say, well, actually, we need to bring justice to them? Because what they do, because it's not a matter of what they're doing necessarily, but what they are causing to humanity in general. And so God's worldview is very, very global. So if it's in the balance of things, it is for the betterment of humanity, then what we see as God's wrath is actually His mercy, because He's protecting the people and the rest of the generation from some of the evil that we may or may not be very cognizant of. So even what we call His wrath was seen as a sign of, or it's a lesson for other people to learn, so that we don't follow some of the same mistakes. I may be rambling, but what I'm saying is, even go back to the Old Testament and the people, so there was a reason why, if they had overtaken the people of, or the children of Israel, we may not be actually who we are now. And let's say if ISIS takes over the world, our children will not be the same. This world will not be the same. So it's a matter of how we look at things, and it's not an easy answer. And who knows what God actually thinks. And so I'm not going to pretend that I know the answer or I know why God is thinking the way God thinks, because I haven't talked to Him in a long time.
I certainly appreciate both of your views, and I may be considered a hypocrite. I've been called that, not a hypocrite,
Heretic.
Heretic.
There
heretic.
you go.
Heretic. I've been called both, actually, but heretic. But I just do not believe in the wrath of God. I don't believe in a wrathful God, period. I think human beings take on vengeance as a matter of trying to rectify things, and rightly or wrongly, and most of it I think is wrongly. But I just do not believe in a wrathful God. I believe that Jesus taught compassion and caring. He did chase out the money changers out of the temple. He did take up a whip of cords. But I just absolutely believe in the compassion, caring, and love of God. And I think that's who God is. That's who God wants us to be. I think that's who He gives us in Jesus, and Jesus becomes a part of us and we of Him. And that means compassion, caring, and love. So I just do not believe in the wrath of God. And that goes against a lot of Scripture, and I understand that. But that's not who I am. So, sorry.
Okay, what is your clock actually accurate? So it's actually 11:25, and as you can see, I have a lot more questions. So but I don't want to keep you all. You all kept to your commitment, and you all kept yours too by being here this morning. So I will try maybe over the next few months through newsletters to give my answers to some of these other questions. But I thank you both, especially you two, very much for being here. I thank Jack too, but he comes more often, so I thank him especially too. And maybe I'll ask Jack also, but I think that was most of the questions that addressed you two. So I'm very, very grateful. Do you have closing comments that you want to make? Go ahead, David.
First off, how many times do you have to come to get into Jack's fan club?
2 more times, and then you can.
All right,
then I'll
so
ignore you too. Yeah. So,
I want to leave you where I started, which is to remind you of the commonalities of our faiths, and also with a challenge that I would like to join cause with you on, which is, as I look around here, I see that our synagogue faces a very similar problem, which is that it's become very hard to get younger people into church or synagogue these days, and the younger families. It's a constant subject of discussion, and we're all fighting against how to sustain belief in a higher purpose in the face of smartphones and everything else these days that's changing our world. But all by way of saying, please come and visit us. We're at the beach at the end of Terraval in San Francisco. So if you want to change your beautiful sunny climate for some fog, come on out and come sit with us in prayer. And we're very good about instructing along the way as your church is, so that you won't feel left out. But I think you would be amazed to see that there is a lot more that brings us together than divides us, and I'd welcome being able to show that to you personally. Thank you again for having us.
And I'll share the same thing. So again, thanks for having me. I will stick around, and so I think we're having coffee. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you have more questions, feel free to talk to me. I'll stick around for as long as you have some questions, as long as we don't stay here until 5 p.m. But I'll just remind everyone else, I think we have a lot more in common and you mentioned the youth. We have the same issues in mosque. We see, for some reason, we are losing out our youth and next generation to some extent. And I'm looking at some of the Gallup polls and studies that they actually have done. What we have to also understand is that we are people of God. And so people see us as fighting each other. So we are fighting among each other, like who is right and who is wrong. We have this mindset of we are right, which means that you must be wrong. And therein lies the problem, I think. I think we start to just cherish who we are. There's a verse from the Quran that says, if God had willed, he would have made you into one nation, but his plan is to test you test you, and also I'm just actually mixing two verses. The other verse is that we made you into different nations so you may get to know each other. Okay? And that's the part I think we need to do more of, is try to get to know each other. Once we try to get to know each other, we'll find out that we actually have a lot more in common. And when people are moving away, so the reason I mentioned these Gallup studies that has come every 5 to 7 years, the rate of atheism and the rate of folks who consider themselves agnostic or with no religion has been rising in the world, including the United States. So we have about 38 to 40% of the Americans who don't believe in any religion. And part of, I think, is rather than actually blaming them, I see this as an opportunity and as a challenge for us, the people of God. So if they see us fighting each other and blaming each other and seeing religion used as to commit violence and hate and whatnot, they go away from religion. So I don't care if it's Islam or Judaism or Christianity, you're all wrong. And they move away from God and religion. So I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we conduct in the way that Jesus taught us, the way that Moses taught us, and what Muhammad taught us. And so rather than actually asking, what would Jesus do, we should also ask ourselves, what would Jesus not do? What would Muhammad not do? What would Moses not do today?
That's great. I really appreciate being invited as well. And I've learned a great deal from you gentlemen. I really appreciate it. I think, though, if we could all agree that what Adverbs 4:3 says, that only Presbyterians go to heaven. Is that the meaning of that? It's in for Adverbs. It's Adverbs.
And on that note, thank you, all three of you, for coming and sharing your wisdom and being willing to be part of an interfaith conversation, because I agree that it's together